Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Joining me on the podcast today is Greg Adamson. Greg is an amazing individual I had the pleasure of meeting down in Tennessee just a few months ago. Today, Greg and I dive into concepts like burnout and career satisfaction and so much more as it relates to the sports performance and sports med professional. Great episode. Really appreciate Greg's time and insights, all the kind words, and all the experiences that he shared throughout this episode. You're going to love it. Enjoy. Greg, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the incredible work you're doing down there in Tennessee, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great work you do?
Yeah, man. First, appreciate you having me. Big fan. Really appreciate the last time. If anybody hasn't got a chance to see you present, they need to. You did a phenomenal job at the last conference. Currently the associate director here at University of Tennessee, going on my 13th year here. Been in college athletics over 15 years. Spent a few years at Central Michigan, a few years at Winthrop University, where I also did my undergrad, did my grad school at Central Michigan. And then on the flip side, I'm also a strategic communications officer in the Air National Guard. So with the Air Force, basically completely different than being a collegiate strength coach. So it's a lot of fun to kind of have another thing that I'm working on and something that excites me. Direct teams I work with right now are men's and women's swim and dive. Both teams top 5 this past year, great season. And then men's golf, we've got regional play and the nationals coming up in May. I've worked with 23 different sports at Division I level. I'm extremely blessed to kind of have had, a coaching career that's kind of seen some highs, seen some lows, some things I've learned from. Like a lot of coaches, I've kind of felt the excitement of being at the top. And I've also felt not just like what it feels like to maybe not be where you want to be, but you hear that term, and I know we're going to get into it, burnout or frustration, or I'm not where I'm at. And so I've kind of had to go through some of those things as well, especially I would say ages about 27 to 33 were pretty difficult 5 to 6 years in my coaching journey. And so I know we're going to probably chat about that and hopefully maybe help some of the coaches out there that are listening to kind of come up with some ways to think about it a little bit differently and reframe it.
Absolutely. I mean, first off, thank you so much for your military service, man. I really appreciate that and the work that you do. And as you mentioned, you've kind of got this wide skill set from military work to strength and conditioning, having worked with over 20 different teams at the highest level of collegiate sport and so on that way. You have such a broad skill set. You've been in the industry for some time. You've kind of seen a lot of different things. And there's some things that come and go. But one of the things that I've seen hold tried and true is that at some point you're going to face challenging times. And I don't really care what your title is, whether that's strength coach or director, physical therapist, athletic trainer. If you're in the sports space, it gets really, really difficult sometimes. And life throws some curveballs at you. And just like the highs get high, sometimes those lows get low. And you kind of start questioning everything, or at least I have in the past, where it's like, hey, why am I doing this again? Am I still doing it for the right reasons? What's my direction? Where am I going? And I think the other piece that gets challenging to process around that as well is sometimes I found I need to take one step back in order to take 10 steps forward, right? It might not be the promotion or the next step that I thought I was going to take, but it's the necessary step to get to that ultimate end goal. And there's a lot to unpack around that topic. So first off, just on your own personal side, have you ever faced anything around this conversation of burnout or just unforeseen circumstances within the strength and conditioning space that way? And if so, what did that look like? And what was kind of your response to them, if you will?
Yeah, so no question. So right, for the audience, I'm an assistant strength coach at Winthrop University, my alma mater. My teams are having success. I'm riding my bike to work, know the AD by name, know all the head coaches, really connected in the community. And I get an opportunity to come to Tennessee, being assistant strength coach with football, right? And I remember, growing up, I was not a good enough athlete to be in the SEC or anything like that. I remember watching like an Alabama LSU game a year earlier and just telling my wife, I wonder what it'd be like to coach in that. Little did I know I would be in a similar situation a year later, right? So I was a graduate assistant in Central Michigan for our director that took that job at Tennessee, Dave Lawson. He called me up, offered me the job. Being a young coach, I tried to negotiate more money at Winthrop. Funny story, the AD told me Knoxville's a nice place to live, so I learned really quick that the mid-tier schools can definitely not compete with SEC, and it was good advice. Knoxville is a phenomenal place to live. But I get to Tennessee, and we're changing the culture. You're young, and basically, my wife gets pregnant. We've been trying to have kids, so it's a huge celebration. That's been a little bit of a issue, so we're going through spring ball, and everything's exciting. My son, you get fast forward 9 months later, it's September. I took the job, accepted in December, got here in January, right? Literally 9 months later in September, my son's born. I'll never forget, it was a Friday night before the team played at Oregon. So I didn't go on that trip. I stayed back, and it was a really rough birth. My wife, it was an emergency C-section. We were in the hospital for a week. It scared me a little bit. They brought me him, not her. She ended up being fine. But it was definitely a unique experience as a father. So I go on the next football trip to Florida. So it's my birthday, it's the 21st. My son's 8 days old, been in the hospital for a week, and I'm on that trip. And I think our quarterback, great kid, had 4 turnovers in the first half, right? So we're getting beat in the swamp. It's my first taste of being on the road in the SEC, and everybody's losing their minds at halftime, rightfully so, right? We weren't reaching the expectation or standards we set we'd sought after. And so I come home. We obviously lost the game. I wish I could say we came back in the second half and everything was great. We lose the game. I come home. Fast forward that season, you're trying to balance being a husband, being a father, being in a new city, buy a house while dealing with the team that didn't become bowl eligible, right? And it's not all on you in that first year, but the pressure is mounting. Everybody's making more money than they've ever made, and they're all learning together. And so that was kind of the first experience for me of a how difficult it is to maybe coach in the SEC. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of really good coaches, right? When I'd been at other schools, if you worked hard, you could kind of get by on a little bit more effort. But that was the first time I kind of felt the pull on, man, I'm working 70, 80 hours. How can I be there for my son, right? I always want to be a great father and a great dad. And so I tell people often, they ask in coaching, like, what's your biggest regret or mistake? And it's that I went on that trip to Florida, right? Like they could have easily, me not being there probably doesn't dictate, I mean, we didn't win the game, right? And so I think oftentimes, first thing is the show's going to go on whether or not we're part of it. And I think that the sooner you realize that, the more acceptable you are with being a part of it. And what I mean by that is when you're younger and you kind of approach these frustrations, you're feeling like, hey, if I don't do X, Z won't happen. The reality is there's all kinds of opportunities for somebody else to step in and help out, somebody else to fill your gap. And it's not that you're not important. It's not that you don't bring a lot of value to it. But once you find yourself shifting from I'm making an impact to I'm don't know if I want to be here right at this moment, or this isn't best for me, you're actually hurting the team more than you're helping it. So that was kind of my first experience with it. So fast forward, I add women's soccer to my plate that season as well. So I'm doing 2 sports. A few years later, our director gets let go, and it was kind of a tough situation. There was a lot of things, and I saw a different side of the profession. You see people get fired, you see people get let go, and so it was a lot of growing up. But at that point, I was probably working 70, 80 hours, working multiple teams, and you just said the word burnout, and that was kind of one of those things where that's about how I felt, man. I was unhealthy. I was in a weight room, not taking care of myself. I didn't like the shape I was in. I didn't like my movement quality and things like that. And luckily, right, I got a great wife and a great support system. I took a step back and said, how can I do this for the next 50 years if this is what I want to do? Right. And so you start to, I think I tell you realize you think you know everything as you're kind of coming up, then you realize you don't know anything. It's like, okay, what things do I need to relearn the right way? One quote I would tell young coaches or even older coaches that feel like burnout may be coming or they're maybe losing their passion is happiness isn't bought, it's built, right? And so we now work in a profession where the top coaches make really good money. And so it can be easy to compare salary. And it's something that we kind of compare whether or not we're doing a good job with on whether or not we're being compensated. But I can attest that when you work at a place, as much as the money is important, and don't get me wrong, I am a big advocate of increasing our salaries. I was on the CSCCA board for it, wrote the paper. Like I'm huge on we need to continue to see this as a profession and ask for more money. But at the same time, when I say it's not bought, it's built. What are the other things that you're doing to kind of fill your cup up? And how are you taking care of yourself? And I think athletes appreciate that side of you. And that's the part that we kind of miss sometimes and forget is they want to see us going after hard things. They want to see us what excites us. And so that's really important. And then I think the other thing is understanding, I know we all have heard paralysis by analysis. There's a lot of information out there, and so I think at times we can feel like in this profession, we don't know it all, or we don't know enough, or man, like when the technology boom happened, I mean, I remember presenting on heart rate, HRV, GPS, movement screen, right? And then Cal drop triphasic training, which if you look at it historically, you take that back to like 1992, there was all kinds of good articles out there. And then, our director, I remember he introduced me to Einol on how to calculate volume, and then you add velocity of the bar. And so, I mean, you start looking at everything we're doing, it can be like really overwhelming and help lead to that burnout as well. Cause you maybe feel like, hey, am I doing enough? And it's definitely a society where we're taught to think like we're not. And I think it's okay to just be great at what you do. Right. And I think you got to learn to accept that. Like, cause for me, you see breath work, right? You see all these different avenues, and somehow along the way, we kind of wanted to wear a badge of honor as if like we were supposed to know it all, right? And full disclosure to everybody listening, like I had never heard of you or ISOFIT till about I saw you present. And I was like, man, this guy's awesome. I love how he's talking about these different things and the context that he's including and how he's teaching it. I was like, I gotta look into this more, right? And so I'm okay admitting that and knowing that I'm still a great strength coach, knowing that my athletes are still phenomenal athletes, right? And I think that that is a place we have to get okay with in the profession because nobody knows it all and everybody has something they maybe do better than somebody else and has something that they can work on. And I know that that is a place of, I think for us that we've kind of skipped over, right? We've tried to chat GPT the profession, and it's okay to reach out for help. It's okay to ask, hey man, I didn't know that, or hey, I'd never heard it explained like that, or I never thought about it like that. Those are all, it's fine. And I think that that's where we got to be a little more vulnerable as a profession. And when you start to be vulnerable, you show some maturity, but you also relax. And I will tell people when you relax, your athletes relax. And so I think that we got to be careful of the anxiety that like anxiety and burnout go together. And I've been there at that point in my life, and it's no fun. But I will tell you, when you come out on the other side, you're going to be more well-rounded and you're going to enjoy it. But if you're going to stick with it, you got to find a way to stick with it that's healthy.
Boy, you said that so well, Greg, and I really appreciate your kind words throughout all of that. And just to kind of run it back and kind of build on some of the things that you laid out there, that concept of the show going on with or without you was something that it surprised me at first, right? I came out of school, just like you mentioned, gonna run the world. I know everything because I got my degree now. Look at what I can do, right? And then you get out there and you start to learn about those situations that, oh crap, maybe I don't know everything. Everyone kind of gets in that moment where it's like, well, what do I do now? Where do I go from here? And then on top of that, there was times where I had to travel for different things. And I was like, well, I'm the main guy here. What's going to happen when I'm not there? Who's going to cover? Are the athletes going to like working with that person? How's it going to go? I just had all these questions in my mind. And then I take the trips. I take like, a vacation, like first actual vacation in like 2.5 years. And I come back and I was like, wow, it's still standing. The place didn't burn down. Everyone got their boxes checked. Like the show goes on whether or not you're there or not, to use your own words that way. And it's one of those things that I think, the conversation around burnout, it's not just a game of always adding to the plate and always doing more. Again, sometimes I take a step back to go forward. Sometimes I take a trip or I step out for a couple days, but I come back with new insights and newfound energy that I can bring into the work that I do with athletes. Because as you've kind of alluded to, the work that someone does with an athlete is not necessarily always measurable, right? I can't put the entire work and effect that a strength coach has, or an AT has, or a PT has with an athlete into some kind of numerical scale and number system, right? Yes, they help you maybe get stronger or recover from injury or something along those lines, but there's so many other effects that you have on athletes, right? As you mentioned, athletes like to see you doing things. They like to see you running your own race and winning your own race. And that motivates them, that inspires them. There's been strength coaches I've talked with on the podcast in the past, and athletes I've talked with on the podcast in the past who have shared stories with me about how they're kind of there for their athletes in ways that most people wouldn't think of a strength coach being there for them, right? It's that support system, the like inspirational figure, if you will. There's all these other effects that your just simple presence there and being as close to your best as possible can have, that I think we undervalue and underappreciate about the profession that way. And again, it's hard to measure those things, but that effect is so strong. Now, with that in mind, too, obviously, you're not always at your best. I'm not always at my best, but being open and humble enough to show when you're not 100%, right? There's days I was rolling into the clinic on 3, 4 hours of sleep, double scooping pre-workout on my drive in, just hoping for the best, right? I think everyone can relate to situations like that, but it's also like I'm very open and vulnerable with the athletes that I work with. Like that's the state that I'm in that day. I don't necessarily encourage it on them, especially. But, I think there's something to be said about just being open and laying your cards on the table to show other people kind of where you're at and what it looks like. And obviously, those kind of behaviors and those kind of things certainly are not sustainable long term, as you mentioned. I think just like in programming, right? We always start with the end in mind. What's our goal? What's our intention with this? Hey, we're going to win a championship this year. In order to do that, we need to jump higher and run faster. Great. Let's build a program around that. The same is true with our careers as well, right? We have to have that end goal. What are we working towards? What are we trying to get to? What does that, high ground of life look like for us? And then from there, we can build our plan to get there. Now, with that in mind, it's not always just a marathon of ups, as we've mentioned. Sometimes it goes up, it goes down. Maybe it turns into a roller coaster ride and we get thrown for a couple unexpected loops all along the way. And that's totally okay. It's more about, in my opinion, the consistency of continuing to pound the rock and get towards that higher ground than it is the unexpected twists and turns. And I think the more focused you can be on whatever that end goal is, the more steered in the right direction you're going to be. You're not going to get as caught up by the little daily hiccups that occur or the little like curveballs that life throws at you, so to speak. At least that's been my own experience where, again, as long as I have that end in mind, I know some steps are going to be forward, some are going to be back, but as long as I continue to move towards that bigger thing that I'm after, that bigger picture, whatever that looks like, I know I'm going to be okay at the end of the day.
Love it.
I would say the other piece as well, you mentioned about the chat GPT element and trying to like outsource the strength and conditioning profession into an AI or whatever that way, or this concept of paralysis by analysis of how we're not ever going to know everything. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but for me, it's not about knowing everything. It's not about having the perfectly written program or the perfect approach to periodization for the season. Again, it goes back to more of the effect that you can have on the athlete. And some of that can be measured because I know there's certain things that, we have to produce objective results and so on that way. But a lot of it, again, I don't think you can measure some of the intangible effects that strength coaches and other professionals can have on the athlete that way. So understanding that maybe it's about what you know to a certain point of it, However, I think it's more about what effect can I have on the team? How can I bring the energy? How can I provide something that the team needs? And that might look like, super hard workouts some days, and it might look more like recovery days and conversations other days. And it might look more like team building activities like the one that you did in your presentation in Knoxville there as well, right? There's so many different ways to provide value. And I think the more you can be focused on what does the team need and how can I provide that, the better off you're going to be as opposed to kind of arguing over little things like set and rep count. Not to say it's not important, but I just think there's so many other ways to provide value that anyone in the position such as you could, accomplish. Quick break because if you're a rehab professional sick of burnout, this could be your answer. Engage Movement's blended practice model is a proven system built by Dr. Ray Gorman, a PT who walked away from the 55-hour-a-week grind and built a blended practice model that doubled his income while working less than 25 hours a week, and he didn't have to rely on the traditional way of selling sessions to do so. It's all about blending remote and in-person services, stacking monthly recurring revenue, and building a business that finally supports your life, not the other way around. This model isn't just theory. Real providers, including myself, are creating lives of freedom and flexibility without being tied to their schedule. And as a listener, you get free access to the complete training. DM my name, Dan, to @RayGormanDPT on Instagram and receive your free breakdown on the model.
Obviously, for me, the best athletes have different ways of being there at their best, right? And so obviously we talked a little bit about, and you saw my presentation, I've got a concept that's called give a ship, SHIP for those listening. But it starts with a relationship. And so I think when you talk about programming, periodization, all right, well, who are all the people that have a relationship with the end goal? It's the athlete, it's the sport coach, it's the PT, the AT, the dietitian, the strength coach, academics in my setting in college, although that's probably a little less important in today's NIL. But right, everybody's got a relationship with the athlete. And so it's important to understand that their time's being pulled many different ways. Some of them enjoy training, some of them don't, right? So I think that that's, when if you think you're gonna, I liken it to religion, right? Like we all have hopefully a different faith. It's something you believe in. I have faith. But you don't usually argue somebody into having faith, no matter how smart you are, right off the bat. It just doesn't happen. And so with these athletes, you could have the greatest periodization model in the world. You'd have to assume that they care, right? What they want to know is how are you going to make me better, right? So I think that's an important piece. And so you're trying to create and cultivate a culture where it's a plan that everybody's kind of working on together, right? And so it's okay to say, hey, like in the past, how have you had success? In the past, when you were at your best, or you felt unstoppable, or you were in a flow state, what was connecting, right? And then it's our job as a coach to kind of hear and listen to what they say, and then connect those dots and move forward. And then when you make it a plan together, like the hard part about that is it's not hardship because it's multiple people's plan, right? And it's hard, even when you talk about start working with the PT, dietitian, the sport coach, the sports psychologist, the talent evaluator, right? Like it's a team of teams. It's hard to have that many people working together. So hardship's part of it. And it's okay to tell them, hey, it's going to be hard. It's supposed to be hard. And at that point, now you're talking leadership and championships. I say all that to say, for me, if you were to walk in our weight room, I always liken it to, from a programming standpoint, Chipotle. Everybody seems to like Chipotle. There's a couple people, I get it, Dos Bros, Mo's, whatever your take is. But you're trying to accomplish a protein, right? So maybe it's lower body strength that day, maybe some explosive exercise. Like, what are your proteins? What are your main things you're trying to get done? But they ask you instantly, do you want a bowl or burrito? Do you want, brown rice or white rice? Do you want black beans or pinto beans? Do you want, chicken, honey chicken? This isn't a commercial for Chipotle, and if it's making you hungry, I get it. Right, but you go on down the line, and I tell people it's one of those things where it's the same thing in our world, right? Like you're trying to figure out what's your highest ROI for each athlete, and certain athletes require a different, completely different meal. And some athletes got dietary restrictions the same way they have training restrictions, right? I have a swimmer I work with. He's a world record holder, NCAA champion, phenomenal athlete. He's 204 pounds. Absolutely. If he'd grown, he's from the Cayman Islands. If he'd grown up in the US, he'd be playing football, right? Absolutely just jacked up. Well, what a lot of people don't understand is he's the best in the world when it comes to short sprints, and he has a hypermobile back. Well, that hypermobility allows him to dolphin kick and do some things that are really unique. I have to be careful in the weight room to overload him in that realm, right? So I got to load him in different ways. So his program looks completely different. Right now, we're fortunate enough to have the number two swimmer in those same events in the world here. He trains completely different. Heavy back squat. The dude's got great form. He's about 20 pounds less, right? So two completely different athletes, same event, come in here and accomplish their goals in completely different ways, right? And I think that to me it took me a long time to say, okay, what am I trying to accomplish? I'm trying to set this person up to have as much success as possible in their sport. All right, so let's reverse engineer it. What's important in the sport? What is their injury history, et cetera, right? Like a good example is that world record holder, that athlete. We have a great PT here, and I know you'll appreciate this. Obviously, he needed, in my opinion, to do some more preventative stuff for his back consistently. Well, as hard as he trains, he's not exactly he's no longer on island time like when he first arrived, where he's just chilling. He's gotten a little bit better, but he needs that structure, right? So I got with our PT and was like, "Hey, man, like I'm gonna have him be with you, and I know that he's gonna have some inflammation pop up every now and then, and some things are gonna not always go right because when you're pushing your body at the highest level, you things can happen, right? And so I'm the first one to say he needs to get with our PT. We have a phenomenal in-house PT, right? And those things are when you're younger in your career, there's a couple things I probably wouldn't have done correctly, right? I would have probably tried to fit them into my mold. I wouldn't have listened to them. I wouldn't have had as many conversations. And then I probably wouldn't have been as quickly to get them with the PT. I'd have been like, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? Now, as you get older and you realize everybody sees it a little bit differently, right? Like I know what I bring to the table is I have a great eye for seeing shapes and how athletes create them. And you saw my presentation. I've got a creative mind to an extent. And so I'm always thinking, how can they get that shape better? Right. I want to reverse engineer that. I'm not afraid, though, to ask somebody that is better at something than me for their help. Because if I'm saying my goal is to help that athlete be at the best that they can be, dude, like I would be doing them a disservice by trying to fill in a gap where I'm not the expert. And it's actually free, right? Like as a coach, it's free to have help and have somebody else invested. But I think that that's where, ego is the enemy. I think we can kind of get in our own way, right? We think that now people think I'm not a great coach. I think it's the exact opposite. I want to be coached by somebody that's willing to do whatever they can and go talk to whoever they can and have those conversations on my behalf so I can be at my best. That's who I want coaching me. So I think that that's kind of hopefully that answers that question a little bit on, just circling back. But I mean, at the same time, too, I do want to throw this nugget in there. Man, we have an awesome job, right? Like I think there's days that could be frustrating. There's days where maybe you don't feel appreciated. But, if you're watching or listening, I've got my phone, I'm holding it up, right? Within my phone, I've been doing this over 15 years. The side that people forget, and this is where I want you to push through that burnout or whatever and kind of come out the other side. Man, I can call up a Green Beret, a Navy SEAL. The influence grows tremendously. And at the back end, if you did it right, then you have just so many awesome relationships that you've built over time in all these different professions. And so I think that that's the part that can get missed is we get so caught up in the here and now. You got to lay the foundation for the future, and it's like anything else. If you play the long game, you're going to be more successful. And so don't forget, we have a pretty cool job. Not most people can pick up their phone, the accountant all day, 10 years from now, he's just going to call more accountants or she's going to call more accountants. And that's cool. Right. But it's like for us, just think of all the cool ways if you leverage it the right way and you treat people correctly and inspire them and believe in them. I mean, shoot, I get lunch with once a month. I try to make sure I connect with at least one former athlete. It's anything from a entrepreneur making clothes for adaptive individuals to, some kid making $1 million a year, right? I'm asking, can I borrow your boat, right? Like you get to kind of see both sides. And so it's a lot of fun to just see them become adults. And so I just want to also just throw that out there because I think we don't talk about that enough on how amazing it is that we get to be a part of their journey.
Oh, 100%. I absolutely love that. The effect that you can have on them, and then in turn, the effect that they can have on you, because it's really a two-way street. I
Yep.
learn from athletes, they learn from me. I try to provide benefit to them, and a lot of times they'll provide benefit to me. It's really a two-way street. And as you mentioned before, in relation to your talk on give a ship, SHIP in particular, it's building that relationship, it's building that connection, and building that kind of lasting effect that way. And again, it's really a two-way street to get there. You also mentioned about how every athlete's path looks different, and just like athletes' paths look different. And we've seen this rise in individualization and things like programming, recovery, and so on that way to the athlete. Going back to your point earlier, the same is true for us in the professions as well that way, right? Everyone's path looks different.
Mm.
Everyone has different goals. Everyone takes different turns to get there. They're starting in different spots. So we really can't get caught up in the comparison game because your, level one look different than someone else's level one. And you might be trying to get to level 1,000 when someone else is only trying to get to level 700. So understanding everyone's unique, everyone's different. The comparison game really kills creativity, in my opinion. So there's value in everything, but understand at the end of the day, you're not going to have the same journey. You're not going to have the same steps that someone else is taking that way. On top of that, as well, you mentioned in relation to working in a high performance team, the concept of ego being the enemy. And one of the phrases that I've taken from Dan Taylor lately is high respect, low ego. That
Mm.
gets you so far in any situation. I don't care if it's working with athletes, working with other disciplines, working within your own profession. If you have high respect for others and low ego, you're going to get there. You're going to check the box. Mission is going to be accomplished. It's reframing the mindset from, I have to do everything to I'm a part of the team. How can I help? What role do I play? And that's something I've really worked on, at least in my own practice that way. Again, going back to when I came out of school, I was guns a-blazing. I was ready to run the world. I knew everything, right? So I wanted to be the guy that steered the ship all the time. Hey, don't worry about it. I'll take care of everything. I'll check all the boxes. I'll do all the things. I've got this. And I very quickly learned that that's not the best way to go about things. It's more about how do I surround myself with the best team of individuals to act in the best interest of the person in front of me. And as you mentioned, sometimes the best coach is the one that's just simply advocating for the athlete in front of them. They might not be steering the ship, but if they're standing up for the athlete, they're helping them out and they're getting them the outcome that they're after, then that's all we can expect at the end of the day. We're in the business of outcomes a lot of the time. Outcomes and connections and relation building. We're not necessarily in the business of, oh, well, I have to do all the work. And again, as you mentioned, it's freeing to know that you don't have to, right? For me, it was like, oh, I don't have to, work with this person 4 days a week in the clinic anymore, which saves them money. It saves me time because, hey, they've got this other person doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm collaborating with that person. Or maybe depending on what phase of the rehab you're in, I might take a completely backseat role. It's like, hey, this is end stage. This is return to play. Strength coach is steering the ship right now. I'm here if you need me. I'm on the outside looking in. But ultimately, you have to be okay with the concept of giving up control. But going back to the point on relationship building, that's where it's so essential, not just with your athletes, but also with other individuals in the space, multidisciplinary. You mentioned your phone contact list and all the incredible people that you have within it that way. And it's like, you can call up any single one of them and get their perspectives on the situation that you're facing, right? You could take your example of an athlete with hypermobile back. If they're coming in with back pain one day, it's like, hey, I can open up my phone, get insight from
100.
chiropractor, PT, AT, SNC, sports psych, sports nutrition. I can kind of get a little bit of everything just through the value of the connections that I built that way. So understanding, trying to circle it back to your Chat GPT comment, you don't have to know everything yourself, but if you know everyone, you can get answers to the questions that you're after just through the power of your own network. And last piece I'll build on real quick is again, your point on the amazing job that coaches have and the impact that they can have on athletes. And again, it's one of those things that you might not get to appreciate it your first couple of years in the space, but I think the longer you're in the space, the more you get to see the value that you can provide, the impact you can provide, and the fruits of your labor, if you will, right? Unfortunately, it's not always the season to harvest. Sometimes you have to plant the crop and do the work to get to that harvest time, if you will, that way. And when you get to that harvest time, that's when you realize the value of the work that you put in. And I think one of the things I've seen, at least for myself around burnout in particular, is, sometimes I feel like I'm doing all the work without harvesting the end result, right? It's like Sisyphus. I'm just pushing the rock up the hill, but I'm never actually getting to enjoy the view from the top. But I think, at least for myself, one of the things that I've kind of realized is there's beauty in that struggle of getting to that end goal. There's beauty in getting to that point where you can appreciate the view from the top. There's beauty in the struggle of waiting for the harvest and putting in all of the work to get there. And it's finding value in those simple little things that, instead of saying, well, this is challenging, this isn't what I want to do, this is too much. It's just trying to reframe the mindset of how can I find value in the little things that I get to do day after day. And I think the more I kind of reframe my mindset away from good and bad towards opportunities and values, the better I became in this space as well. And again, I'm still young. I still don't have all the answers. I don't have it all figured out, but just trying to share a little bit about kind of things that I've seen from my own experiences thus far that way. And obviously, the other piece to burnout, as you mentioned, is you mentioned you can't pour from an empty cup. What are ways that you yourself like to kind of keep your own cup fulfilled that way? And what kind of things do you see other coaches doing successfully that allows them to ensure that they're never really pouring from that empty cup, if you will?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, for me personally, I was 33. We created the director of Olympic strength and conditioning job here. I helped write it. We went through an AD change, and I was a finalist for the job and did not get it. We ended up hiring my current boss, Dan Worth, the best person I've ever worked for, phenomenal human. And basically at that point, I took a step back. I was 32, sorry, 32. Took a step back, said, okay, I've been working really hard for this, didn't get it. What do I do? And I always wanted to be in the military. And when I was at Winthrop to supplement my income, I was a couple interviews in to be a Navy Reserve officer. And so we got a local base. I went out there, said, hey, are you guys recruiting? Obviously, someone that had my experience with the master's degree, they're like, for sure. So I went enlisted first and 33 found myself at boot camp. But what I found is I was a part of a new team and it was a new experience, right? And it was something I hadn't done. And it was a chance to take my coaching skill sets and see how do they translate in a different career field and a different career path. And it's part of the guard. So it's a week in a month. There's a couple weeks here. I mean, it's actually, I tell people it's a part-time job with a full-time commitment because it's more time than you realize. But I fill my cup that way because now I fast forward 7 years later, I've gone from being on the enlisted side, being an NCO to now an officer. I've been to OTS, I've been in multiple different schools, and probably like, okay, how does working fill your cup up? What's awesome about it is I get an opportunity to lead in a different way and I get to continue to grow, right? And I'm at my best when my cup is full, when I'm learning. I love to learn. I've always just kind of I've thought leaders are readers, but I just have a thirst to try and figure out how do we solve this problem or become more efficient or improve solutions, right? So that's one way for me that I've been able to do it is kind of check that box. Another is obviously I love being around my family, coaching youth sports. I'm a way better college strength and conditioning coach than I am a youth sport coach. That's very evident in my wins and loss records. Most people don't have a better record in the SEC than they do 10U football, but that's me. I definitely got a better record in the SEC. But I love being around the kids and kind of coaching my son a little bit, my daughter, and just being there. So that's fun to watch my kids compete and go through that, and then, my boss, he loves, bow and arrow, right? So he's always shooting arrow. The guy that's got the office next to me, he's a legend in the field. His name's Brad Roll. He loves his Harley, loves his motorcycles, right? Barry, two offices down, been doing it. He's in his 50s. I'm actually like the youngest coach on staff right now. He loves to play guitar. right? And so if you were to come talk to us on a Monday, I'm probably talking to you about how we got beat by another local football team, and I think they're recruiting and they got some kids that they held back to kind of create an edge. And I'm trying to figure out how to recruit, youth football. Dan's going to talk to you about shooting his bow and arrow and what he's doing. Brad's going to talk to you about where he took his Harley, and Barry's going to talk to you about what he's learned on guitar. But what we all have is something outside of here that has nothing to do with this, right? And so I think that that's really important. I love to read. I think it's really important for your mind to have something that can kind of mindlessly go. And then as I've gotten older, I've also gotten better at relaxing. It took me a long time to do that. Then once a year, I'll throw this tidbit out there that's really worked for me. Once a year, I take a trip where I can't use my phone, right? So maybe I'm out of the country, maybe I'm on a cruise, maybe last year I was in the mountains with my son, but my phone doesn't work. It forces me to not check it because I don't have service, right? So I know you're like, well, just turn your phone off. As realistic as that sounds, it's just not as easy for me the way I'm wired. And so I think kind of having some, boundary set up there, but I you got to find something to redirect, right? Kind of take that focus. Because the problem with our profession is you're going to have, like you talked about, and we talked about, some good days and some bad days, right? You're going to have times where everything kind of went right, but then you're going to have some days where everything kind of went wrong. And so you have to remove yourself a little bit. And in our profession, it's on display. Whereas at times in other professions, I always liken it, no offense to the guys at the bank, but if they had a bad day counting money, nobody knows, right? If $1,000 wasn't miscounted, I don't know, you don't know. Whereas in our world, if we have a bad day, whether it's an athlete that you've worked with or whether it's a team you're working with and they take a big L, everybody knows, right? And you got to take ownership of it and, communicate about it. But it's not hidden and everybody has an opinion of it. People have less opinions, even if they got a bad meal, at the restaurant last night, they don't even know the chef to have an opinion on the chef, right? Like they got an opinion on, man, they should have done this or they should have done that. And so you definitely got to have a support system as well that, you know, I found myself trying to get more friends sometimes outside this profession that have no clue, right? Because I don't want to be having a conversation and you'd be like, well, probably would have won if you'd done 4 sets of 10 instead of 3 sets of 8 on those rear elevated split squats. So I'm like, what? Like, you sure? Like, you think that, so like, I think it's just important to have that. And the last word I'll leave you with is perspective. Keep perspective, to fill that cup up. At the end of the day, there's a lot at stake and it's people's careers. Um, but you got to keep perspective on the fact that because of that, patience will win, right? And so patience, persistence will win if you're doing it the right way. So just keep in perspective of what's actually an issue and what's something that you can kind of punt to the next day. I think I used to go to bed at night, upset about how the day went or we didn't accomplish certain things. I'm a lot better as I've gotten older at compartmentalizing and saying, hey, I can kind of wait to refocus on this tomorrow till I'm in a better state because right now I'm not really solving anything. That just comes with experience, and I think this whole conversation was about burnout at the start to kind of get to the help with it. It took me a while to kind of figure out what's going to work for me, So if you're a coach out there or you're a PT or AT, dietitian, whatever you are, if you're in this, you're a service-based industry, you just got to figure out what's going to work for you. So you're excited and kind of always helping others in a way that they want to be helped from. But man, your cup's got to overflow, right? Like it's got to overflow. And if it's not overflowing, it's okay to take a pause and say, hey, and I'm a lot better at that now that I'm older. Hey guys, one of the coaching staffs I work with, my grandfather passed away and I was like, hey, I'm a high energy, upbeat person when I'm around the athletes. It's like, it's probably going to take me a couple days to just adjust, right? I got to kind of work through this. I got to get out to California, all this. And we all have those things, that we got to kind of look at, but it's okay to also communicate. If I seem off, here's why. It's not that you're looking for sympathy or empathy, although those things should come if you're with good people. You're just communicating that I may not be at my best. And like you talked about, you come in off of 4 hours, you've been traveling. Hey, I may not be a 10 out of 10 today. I'm going to give you what I've got. Uh, I know for a fact, people appreciate that honesty rather than the false bravado of it's going to be okay or I'm the best, etc. Right? Like just communicate because at some point they're going to go through something similar. And it actually leads to conversations. And I think that's the part that gets missed is like when you tell that when you're talking with a client, hey man, I'm before I sleep, man. It's like, no way, man. Like when I hurt myself, I'd been up for 2 weeks straight, stressed about this, and I knew I was in a bad spot. And you just now you have a connection point to kind of then go a little deeper and build that trust. And trust is what we're after because once you have trust, they'll actually do it, right? And that's the hard part. And they'll do it with intention. And we know how important intention is. And so hopefully that helps somebody out there listening.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, you mean to tell me strength coaches and individuals in the sports space can have a life outside of sports? Really?
They
Like,
should. They better. They better. I mean, it's
it's
like,
crazy. And it's also amazing to me how many analogies and connections you come up with when you see the world outside of kind of your main lens,
oh,
if you will, right? Like,
love
say
it.
your
Yeah.
main lens is S&C and you're putting in 80 to 100-hour weeks in the weight room that way. Like, those are long, grueling days. But then you step back and you look at other things. You still have kind of that strength coach mode in the back of your brain on things and you start to see overlaps and patterns that way and it just leads to new connections and new thoughts and I've certainly learned a lot by just kind of stepping back stepping out of the profession but never necessarily like being able to shut that switch fully off if you will that way. So I think there's so much value in that. And as you mentioned, this is a service-based industry regardless of where you're at in the sports field that way and understanding the value you can provide to others, but knowing that you owe it to yourself to take care of yourself and put yourself in a good state. And I can't emphasize your point on communication enough as well, because there are those days that are trying and challenging, and bad stuff does happen, unfortunately. But the more you are open about communicating that with others, the easier the conversation from there becomes. I think a lot of times we find ourselves in tricky situations because we didn't communicate what was going on. And I think a lot of things can be avoided by improving our own communication. And that could perhaps be a whole separate conversation, right? About how do we communicate with one another in the profession, verbally, non-verbally, and so on that way, because I found, at least again, my own experience, sometimes the most powerful communication I've had with athletes that I've worked with is not the things that I say, but it's either the things that I do or my own body language within the session that way. If I'm like, looking at my phone, completely distracted, clearly uninterested in whatever it is they're doing, they're not going to value it. They're not going to check in versus if I just something as simple as just paying attention to the little things that they do, occasionally giving some feedback. They know I'm invested. They know I'm there. They know I'm attentive to them and understanding that, a lot of these things have more layers than we're able to cover in a 45 to 60-minute conversation that way. And there's just so much more to dig into around this conversation around burnout. And I would say even just some of the soft skills and less discussed things in the coaching space, if you will, that way. Obviously, you are such a phenomenal resource for all of these things, Greg. You have a wealth of knowledge, and I really appreciate your time. For people who want to find out more about you, where can they find you at online and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So Instagram, UT Coach Greg. Obviously, I kind of picked one social media to just be good at. To everybody that's got a lot, I really appreciate those that put out the TikTok and some of those cool ways. But UT Coach Greg on Instagram is kind of where, I pay the most attention to. You can just shoot me a DM. My email is Greg, dot Adamson, Adamson at utk.edu. And then I tell people, don't be afraid to hit up my cell, 803-389-0068. I feel like a late salesman or something. Make sure you give me a call at 803-389-0068. But, reach out. I mean, I love trying to help people. I think one advice I will give is if you reach out, say you're a young coach, don't be afraid to send an email or two, right? Like all of us in our space, we get emails by the day, but make sure you address it in a way that comes off as respectful and looking for information, and do it in a way that really connects with the person. And you'll definitely probably get a response back, but you got to be patient. I think like all of us in life, like it takes me a day or two sometimes to get back to some of those things. But yeah, I love helping people. And, obviously if anybody's ever through Knoxville, don't hesitate to kind of connect. And obviously I appreciate you having me on, and I think you've got phenomenal perspective. And Dude, your athletes are incredibly blessed to have you. I want to just say that just the way you come across, you can tell that you have a deep care for them being at their best. And that's just it's really special to see.
Greg, I really appreciate everything, man. Do you have any other kind of closing thoughts or anything we missed in our discussion today?
No, I mean, I think obviously if you're struggling with burnout, keep pressing, right? Like keep pressing. You're going to be better for it. And then you're going to have ways to help those coming up behind you. I oftentimes talk with my younger coaches and our coaching assistants. We, have 4 to 5 GA types a year. And, I try and do my best to make sure that they leave with the things that I didn't know, right? Or the things that I didn't see, or kind of give them feedback or drop things. So when they do face those challenges, they have some money deposited in the bank of challenges to kind of overcome it. But it gets better on the other side, and it's gonna, as long as you keep perspective and remember happiness is built, not bought, right? And that sucks to kind of be in the moment sometimes because we've all had different ways that we've measured success, whether it be financially, whether it be with wins, losses, etc. Um, you got to build it. And if you build it, it will last.
I love that. Everyone defines success differently, but ultimately, if you keep working towards your own end goal that way and you build it from the ground up, there's so much value in that. I love that, Greg. Really appreciate your time and all the insights you shared and just your willingness to continue to connect and have a positive impact on the profession. Thanks for everything you're doing, man.
Appreciate it, brother, man. You have a good day.